Good afternoon and welcome to Queer Town Hall. I'm Nancy Hawk, the Executive Director of Basic Rights Oregon, and today we're going to talk about comprehensive sex ed and how it's been weaponized by anti-LGBTQ groups, Parents' Rights in Education, the Family Policy Council, and others. At Basic Rights Oregon, our staff has literally had to follow Parents' Rights in Education across the state as they've gone from school district to school district, asking schools to opt out of CSE or comprehensive sex ed curriculum. Their reasoning is often centered in anti-choice, anti-LGBTQ sentiment. Along with our friends at Planned Parenthood and other concerned groups, we've helped organize students and parents to stand up for curriculum that normalizes LGBTQ identities and gives students tools to understand consent. Despite all of our efforts here in Oregon, we were still surprised to find that similar types of groups had not only collected signatures to put comprehensive sex ed on the ballot in Washington state this November, but collected 250,000 signatures during a pandemic. So today we're going to hear about comprehensive sex ed, why it's important, what the campaign looks like, and how you can get involved in fighting for it, right from the comfort of your own home. And I think it's really important as Oregonians who care about our students that we care about our students in Washington state and that we're fighting for them, because if they can get it done in Washington state, they could do it in Oregon. And that's a battle we've already won. So let's keep it that way. So I have some amazing folks here, mostly based in Washington, but a few from Oregon. And I'm going to let folks introduce themselves. And so what I'd love to hear is your name, your pronouns, your organization, and a little bit about what you do there. So let's get started with Austin.
Great, thank you. So my name is Austin Lee, and I use they and them pronouns. I work for Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette, and I am our education and outreach coordinator based in our Vancouver Health Center. So in my role, I do partnership development throughout the community, but I also provide sexual education to middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, adults, and really anyone in the community who's looking to learn more about, consent, healthy sexuality, prevention.
That's great. Thank you, Austin. And next up, I'd love to hear from you, Jessica, who we met in the battleground around comprehensive sex ed in Battleground.
Hey, I'm a parent in the Battleground School District, and I advocate for LGBTQ kids in general in the district since I have LGBTQ kids, but particularly one topic has been around comprehensive sexual health education.
Great. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for fighting for LGBTQ kids. It's so important. Kaiden, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me, Nancy. So my name is Kaiden Blü. I am with GLSEN Washington State. I use they, them pronouns. And what my role in GLSEN Washington State is working on inclusive curriculum for LGBTQ plus students and educators. So our mission at GLSEN is to end bullying and harassment of LGBTQ plus educators and students in schools throughout the state.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you. And Sarah, we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, folks. My name is Sarah Moran. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the board chair of Gender Justice League, which is a Seattle-based trans rights nonprofit. We do a lot of legislative advocacy and consulting work, and join coalitions to do some direct action in largely in Seattle and in areas around the state to advance the rights of the LGBTQ plus in general, but specifically trans, non-binary, gendered, non-conforming individuals.
That's wonderful. Your organization does incredible work, and glad to have you on. Thank you all so much for joining us. And so before we get too far into the conversation, I'd love to get started with just talking about what comprehensive sex ed is and what it's looked like. Austin, would you mind kicking us off with sort of just an overview of what CSE is?
Sure, yeah. So I've been working in this field for 15 years now, and it's grown and changed a lot. And so I like to think of comprehensive sex ed as really a lifelong journey, right? A spiritual, physical, emotional, mental journey that we're all on for our whole life. And so when it comes to comprehensive sexual health education for young people in schools, a lot of times what we're talking about is age-appropriate content, which we could get into more what that means in a bit, but making sure that the content that we're sharing with students is medically accurate and scientifically accurate, not based in myths or shame or fear, that it teaches the wide range of, sexual health promotion behavior. So if we are going to be talking about abstinence, we're also talking about preventing pregnancy and STIs with things like using condoms or birth control. And that we're making sure that it's appropriate for students of all ages, of all genders, all races, all disability statuses, sexual orientation. So really trying to make sure that it's inclusive of everyone and meets all those round needs that we all have.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like, why would anybody be against that? Sounds amazing. Why don't we start with Oregon? Dominic, do you want to talk a little bit about, and sorry, I didn't have you introduce yourself, the man behind the curtain, Dominic Lopez. You can introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about sort of the claims against comprehensive sex ed that we've heard in Oregon.
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone, I'm Dominic. I use he and him, and the second time showing up on the show that I also broadcast. So if you see me moving between screens, that's what's going on here. But it's rough. I think folks that are watching now probably recall, some of you at least recall the meetings that we were attending regularly later last year. The school boards, West Lynn and Hillsborough and in Oregon City, where in Lake Oswego, that was a big one, where parents' rights to education and a lot of parents that they've frankly just scared by saying things about like the restrooms that they're going to cause, sexual assault because of the way they're configured, and that these curriculums are going to encourage, some stuff that I really can't even repeat, really heinous accusations. And we would show up to these meetings, usually at first totally outnumbered by PRE and and the parents that they've scared, and show up again, hopefully in even numbers, just trying to set the record straight and make it clear that the language they're using is a direct attack against trans youth and against marginalized youth. Some of the folks that would testify would say things about how it, quote unquote, not age appropriate. Often they cry foul at the process, it moved too quickly, but sometimes someone will get up there and say the quiet part out loud, right? They would say they would evoke images of sexual assault in relationship to LGBTQ people, to trans people, which is a really horrendous and well-worn accusation. And, in one pretty notable instance would get shouted down from the front of the stage for saying it, but you knew that they were in good company, right? The room was full of people holding no CSE signs along with them. And so it's just these meetings have been rough over and over and over again. And Jessica, I attended the Battleground meeting with you early this year before the pandemic really set in. And, we saw a lot of that repeated, north of the Columbia. And as this ballot measure came together, it just became really clear this is one of the same, right? What we're dealing with in Oregon and what we're seeing in Washington are deeply connected to each other, and the difference is that in Washington there's a ballot measure, right? There's an actual law being voted on, and there's an action that has to be taken.
Yeah, Jessica, would you talk a little bit about what you saw happening in your school district in Battleground?
Yeah, so this started in, I believe, July 2018. and they were going to have their second reading for the comprehensive sex ed to get it up to date. And my background is I had been taught by my community, not my parents, that being LGBTQ was wrong and a choice. And so when my community reached out to me to come to the school board meeting, they didn't know I had already changed my mind on that. Like I was actually pro-LGBTQ and don't believe that it's a choice. And so I had a kid that came out, and I was like, how could they approach me when I had a kid that came out? And it was worded in that, like, let's go fight sex ed. It was unkind words about LGBTQ. And so I was like, I'm in fight mode because you really hurt me about my kid. And I actually think I have the proper thinking on LGBTQ. And so I've just been trying to get people to come to the school board meetings, and it's terrifying because, facing my community coming out as an ally, it's losing my community. And we are way outnumbered in Battleground, way outnumbered. And some folks that come to speak and support are LGBTQ themselves. So to hear these things that are just very, very wrong and damaging, to a person, their feelings, and how it impacts how society views people is really rough. And it's been really hard. We've been losing a lot. We did win our last one. But it's just it's really hard, and I'm not in a place to help reason and explain the language like Dominic was saying. I'm just like, this is right. Let's have the school offer this to the people that want it. And one really frustrating thing for me in our district is a lot of people fighting to get rid of comprehensive sex ed in our district. They don't have their children in our schools, and that's just very frustrating.
Yeah. And well, thank you for standing up. And I'm really sorry that you've lost friends and community over this. I know it takes a lot of bravery to stand up against people you considered your friends. And I think it's really important, right, that your kid and other kids hear that voice and hear a mom who's standing up for LGBTQ kids and your own child. So thank you. And I think one of the things that I've been really has been really hard is how much they focus on LGBTQ identities and just sort of just like our existence, like just telling kids that we exist is like too much, right? Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about how that has felt?
Well, yeah. So I'm trans, and I grew up in Boise, Idaho in the 80s and early 90s. And so sex ed was it was a joke, essentially. I remember that we had a health class, and that was the extent of it. And the health class had 3 different levels, and the level, the highest level, was the only one that would even say anything about sex in general, the mechanics or any detail of it. And you needed parents' permission to get into that. And because of my scheduling, I had to take the health class in summer school, and they didn't offer that one. So I got the bare minimum. I don't even remember what it was, but it was not terribly useful. If it had been something that was comprehensive and something that said, hey, there's, this is what, gay people are, this is what, LGBT folks are, here's what queerness is, here's what transness is, here's some role models, some examples, my life would have been drastically different. I would not have gone through the 20 plus years of wondering who I was and wondering what was wrong with me if I had had that. And there is this I feel like there's a conservative trope that gayness is contagious, or that transness is something that you just like something sticky on the ground. If you get near it, then it'll be a part of you. And like, it's not how it works. And what it is people who are feeling these things are going to be feeling them regardless. And if they don't have a framework around which to understand them, then they aren't able to fully develop into like whole people, and really actualize themselves and really be seen as who they are. So yeah, my life would have been very different if I'd had access to comprehensive sex ed, comprehensive LGBTQ plus positive sex ed as well. And so that's one of the reasons why my personal experience, I'm like, yes, we absolutely need this everywhere. And more information is generally better. That's the trope of like sex education leading to kids having sex is also like is something that I hear a lot. I'm kind of speculating at the motives of the opposition here a little bit, because I am in a bit of a bubble in Seattle. But yeah, just the idea that kids won't have sex if you don't tell them that it exists. That's demonstrably false. And you don't need to have if you don't teach your kids about sex ed, and if the school doesn't teach your kid about sex ed, somebody will. And that person who introduces your kid to the ideas of sex might not be who you want it to do. And that might be someone who tries to take advantage of them. It might be some guy who tells his 14-year-old girlfriend that if you loved me, you'd have sex with me. And she doesn't know any better. But if she knows better and has known better since fourth grade, that she is in control of her own body and agency, and she doesn't have to put up with that, then that is just basic safety. And yeah. That's the big reason that that Gender Justice League is on board with this, and it's a big reason why the campaign is fighting for this in Washington. Just real quick, for anybody on the show here who's not familiar with how we do things in Washington, the Comprehensive Sex Education Bill was passed by the legislature earlier this year, in February, I believe, to mandate this consent-focused, age-appropriate, LGBTQ plus positive sex ed curriculum throughout Washington. And then the ballot measure, it was put on the ballot by a referendum process, so that you can, if you collect enough signatures, then any law passed by the legislature can be put to the voters for a vote. And that's what happened. So, a lot of the opposition is coming from this place of no, stop, don't do this thing. And we're but we need the thing. It's important. People need it now because kids are in danger from not having the right information, from, being able to tell when somebody is grooming them, or being able to spot a sex trafficker who's trying to get, trying to take advantage of them. That's really important. And that's why everybody needs this information.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so I was really shocked at the 250,000 signatures that were gathered to get this on the ballot in November. Kaiden, can you talk a little bit about the folks who made this happen and sort of our opposition, as it were, in this campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of what Sarah just mentioned, the legislature passed this law back in February, March, and then Governor Inslee actually signed it back into law. So this was supposed to be law, and it's supposed to be happening in our state. Unfortunately, this law is now suspended because of those 250,000 signatures to put this referendum on our ballot come November. These signatures are out of fear, and that is so upsetting for a state that is one of the most inclusive in our country. We think about it, over 5% of our populace identifies as LGBTQ+. 5% sounds like a little, but it's actually millions of adults in our country, and upwards of 5 to 15% of our youth identify with LGBTQ+ identities. So it's another significant amount of proportion of people that identify and are in support of making sure we have comprehensive and inclusive sexual education. So those 250,000 signatures are a small percentage of what are actually going to be represented in this curriculum. So it's unfortunate that small percentage of people is making it so challenging for millions of people that deserve an education and the right to know about their bodies in a safe, in an age-appropriate way.
Yeah, thanks for that. And from what I understand, because I think just the number of signatures was surprising, that a lot of these signatures were gathered in churches and were gathered in large gatherings, and because there's no other way they could have gotten that many that quickly, and it feels like a lot of church-based and then fear-based curriculums. And one of the things that I've heard about sort of the talking points of the other side is they talk about the curriculum really focuses on affirmative consent. And so they're saying that it sexualizes children as age inappropriate, but that makes no sense. Why is affirmative consent valuable to the students who are taught it? It feels like some basic life skills to me, but why do you think they're focusing on that? Do you want to take that, Austin?
Sure, yes. And I am really grateful to Sarah for bringing up that piece around consent. That was something I left out when I was talking about what comprehensive sex ed is, right? It's talking about boundary setting. It's talking about consent. It's bodily autonomy. It's about how to have equitable relationships. And so I think that there's real fear from folks about what does it mean to be age appropriate and what are we sharing with young people. When we look at the policy and the laws that are in place in Washington state, for folks kindergarten through third grade, they're focusing on social emotional learning, which is respecting each other, knowing your own bodily autonomy in terms of hugs, and things like that, asking before you hug, very age appropriate messages. And as students get older, so as you're moving into middle school or high school, you're going to be having some different conversations, about what consent looks like. But I think that, I joke with folks all the time when I teach sex ed is we all learned consent when we were in, preschool, if not before then, that you ask before you borrow someone's pencil, And so this is a skill that we're training people in their whole life. Unfortunately, our culture does a lot to push back on that and train us to, not have healthy boundaries, but we do know this skill, and so it's really just being able to teach this skill in pieces and in stages that make sense for that age group. And by middle school, a lot of students are interested in dating, and so talking about what does that look like to get consent when you're in a dating relationship, but frankly, when I talk to middle schoolers, we're also just talking about consent within friendships, because I think we all remember middle school as a tough time, and everyone's just going through it. And so we need to practice those skills of setting boundaries with our friendships. And that helps us feel more prepared to set those boundaries as we move into dating relationships, sexual relationships, long-term partnerships as we're adults. So to get back to your point, I think people are just not really understanding what does it look like to teach consent. It does sound scary to say that you're going to teach consent if you think of consent only in the framework of sexual consent. Yeah, we're not going to teach sexual consent to second graders because that's not developmentally appropriate. That's not the information they need. But they do need to know that their body is their own. No one should touch their body without their permission, And what to do if somebody does touch them or does something inappropriate to them, That's a really big protective factor for young people. And what I hope is that youth all across the state get access to this. And that's what this law did, is mandate it throughout the state. Because right now, the patchwork model that we have, only about 60% of schools are doing this. So the information that you get about your own bodily autonomy and your rights as a person depends on your address. And I don't think that's fair for our youth.
Yeah, definitely not fair. And I realize I've forgotten a lot of basics. I forgot to say you can put your questions in the YouTube chat, and folks who write questions or donate to help offset the cost of our live captioning will be entered into a raffle for a Protect Trans Kids tote bag, ever popular tote bag. And then also, I also forgot the icebreaker question because I'm just so excited to talk about this. Yeah, I might, maybe when Representative Rachel Prusak comes on, we can do a do-over and I'll do the icebreaker. But I also, I just have to share this. I feel like I've maybe over-taught consent to my 6-year-old who has very long hair, because when I try to brush his hair, he's like, no, thank you, my body, my choice. And I'm like, you need to brush your hair. Yeah. It's very
it is a double-edged sword for sure.
It really is.
Oh my god, same thing,
like,
but with toothbrushing.
But yeah. So can you and so not to pick on you, Austin, but I feel like you're at Planned Parenthood. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the anti-choice sentiment that's being put forth around the opposition to the referendum?
I'll say I don't specifically know a lot about that. I personally have just been choosing not to check in on opposition messaging a lot for my own wellness. But I will say that, a lot of the folks who are against comprehensive sexual health education also are anti-choice folks. And there's a lot of concern about like how sexuality is taught and like what that messaging is and how that aligns with sort of a worldview where people get to make choices about their own bodies. I do know that there are concerns. I've heard concerns from people in the community that abortion is going to be taught in the schools, right? We're going to be talking about abortion care in the schools. I shouldn't say we because I'm not a teacher, but that teachers would be doing this. And, that is roundly not a part of the education, right? I mean, to maybe acknowledge that, like, that is a medical procedure that some people will have, many people will have, and you have the right to access it. But one of the great things I heard from a middle school teacher who was talking about this, who works in Washington, was like, trust your teachers. Don't you trust us with your kids every day? Don't you trust us to manage and navigate these conversations in ways that are reasonable and that really are about your child's like wellness and health? Like, what is this worldview that you think teachers are like secretly going to do these things, right? Or that, most teachers are not comfortable having these conversations. They don't want to go down the rabbit hole with young people. So they're going to find ways to give appropriate information that's contained. And I think that's a really good message for us to remember is like, trust our teachers.
Yeah, it's really important. And so I feel like, it's this interesting thing, right, where the opposition gathered the signatures to put this on the ballot measure, but then they need an affirmative vote. So we're asking Washington voters to vote yes on this referendum. Kaiden, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's been like working on this campaign?
Absolutely. So I feel like this campaign is one of those moments of frustration because like we all agree here on this panel, like it's a human right. We all deserve to know what our bodies are doing, what our bodies can do, and how we should protect our bodies and avoid sexual abuse and sexual assault. I think that's the most important part of this campaign messaging, and the reason to approve R90 is because we get to protect our bodies, and the time is now, because we are actually seeing an increase in rates and prevalency of STIs and other diseases because of this pandemic. People aren't getting preventative care, and people are having more unprotected sex. So we do need to talk about it. The time is now to have this conversation. And to the anti-choice people and to the people that are afraid of this bill, are you going to have these conversations with your kids at home? If not, why not let the teachers and educators in your schools that you trust with them day in and day out take care of that conversation for you? Because more often than not, these kids, your students, your children are going to hear this message more loud and clear from their educators rather than that uncomfortable conversation from their parents when they'll say, hey, let's talk about the birds and the bees. Or when your parent hands you a book, are they going to read it? Are they going to engage? Are they going to take away any messages that can relate to them? And to the point of, from my standpoint in GLSEN, we talk about the importance of an inclusive curriculum. As of right now in our 2017 Climate School Survey, only 16% of students in Washington State saw a positive LGBTQ plus inclusive message in their sexual health or the sexual ed curriculum. That means 84% of our youth did not hear a positive message. And that's concerning. And that's where I want to take a stand with GLSEN, is to make sure we all can get that number to 100%, because all students deserve to know that a positive message of LGBTQ plus in sex ed, in the classroom in general, because guess what? Marriage equality is the law of our land, and we should start that in our schools, in our sexual health curriculum, because if marriage equality is real, sexual health and comprehensive sexual education should be real as well.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And so it feels like, I'm curious, like Battleground is, just north of Vancouver, but its own school district, and how much you're hearing about this campaign in Battleground, Sarah? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jessica. I'm looking at the screen right at you, but sorry, Jessica.
No worries. That's what I thought. I just waited. I, like Austin, have removed myself from reading. I've been hearing it for 2 years. I guess to backtrack a little bit, it is a lot of fear. And I know I went to a meeting when this all first began, maybe 6 months after it began in Battleground. And, because I'm like, what's going on? I didn't know who to hear from, who is pro-sex ed around us. So I went to the anti-sex ed, well, there's some information. And I was pretty terrified when I walked out. And some of the people were people like I know and trust, And I was just like, oh, this is not good. I was freaked out, and I'm like, I'm going to support it anyways. And then I worked on, reading stuff. And last year when we had a parent review for the curriculum, so I got to look at the curriculum, and I was very shocked and disappointed that what I was looking at in the curriculum was the actual opposite of what I was told. That scared me to death. And so there's a lot of misinformation. And when we're hearing it from misinformation from people we know and trust, we're more likely to just believe them and not research it. And that it's just a lot of fear. Most of what I've heard in our school district, which we haven't had a meeting on this since March, right before the pandemic, and it's very, a lot of it is like parents' choice. Parents want to teach their own children. And I think that's great if parents want to do that and that works for their family. It does not work for every family, it doesn't work for every child. There's a lot of scenarios where they need help, education on this in the school districts. And I think it's great to be able to opt out of any part or all part if a parent chooses.
Great. Well, we have, thank you for that. And we have Representative Rachel Prusak with us right now. So let's bring her on. And Representative Prusak, we saved the icebreaker for you. So I was so excited to dive in that we just started going. And because of course, you've seen us at many school board hearings. And I know in your district, especially in West Lynn and Wilsonville, you've been there as PRE has tried to get the school districts to opt out of comprehensive sex ed. And so so that we're all together, why don't we do another just quick round of your name and your organization, and then share one book or one show that you've enjoyed during this pandemic. And I'll just go ahead and start with Austin again.
So I'm Austin Lee with Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette, they and them pronouns. I have been rewatching The Great British Bake Off. I needed their joy and their kindness in my life.
Yes, definitely. I'm with you there. And yeah, I just want to say I was really disappointed when the new season came out and it was only one episode, because you need more than that. I need to fall asleep multiple times per night. Jessica?
My name's Jessica. My pronouns are she, her. I am a parent in the Battleground School District in Washington. And I have come across a fabulous, happy show called The Masked Singer. I said bad things all about it until I watched it, and it's lovely. I watched all 3 seasons, and so I'm so excited for season 4.
That's great. Kaiden?
Awesome. Hi, guys. My name is Kaiden. I use them pronouns. And this pandemic, I've been kind of challenging myself in trying to read different literatures and kind of broaden my horizon and kind of grow and deepen my learning of what students of color go through. So right now I've been reading As Zero Savages, You Failed Us. And so students of color talk about Seattle schools, and I recommend reading it for sure.
Oh, sounds great. That's great. Rachel?
Hey everyone, Rachel Prusak, as mentioned, state representative. Thankful to be here. Sorry I was late. I've been catching up on all the RuPaul drag races and especially just watching the new one in Canada. And it's been really fun. As far as reading, I can't say I've read a book during this pandemic because I've read a lot on staying on top of everything we're doing and special sessions and policy. So really just focusing on policy work for reading.
That's very important. Thank you for doing that. And Sarah?
Hello again, Sarah Moran, she, her pronouns. I am the board chair of Gender Justice League, a Seattle-based trans rights nonprofit that does a lot of legislative advocacy and direct action for trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming communities. And I also have had strangely zero energy for reading or even movies. Like, I love movies, I don't really watch TV, but I've just watched almost none. My routine has been so disrupted the past 6 months that I've fallen out of a lot of those habits, but I have been playing the Dark Souls series of video games, and that has been very engrossing in a good way that distracts me from a lot of what's going on.
That's great. You should connect with Dominic.
Oh, we already did.
Gamers unite. Rep Prusak, thank you for being here. And I know you've seen so much of what Parents' Rights in Education was trying to do in West Linn and Wilsonville. And can you talk a little bit about your sort of feelings about why it's so important that this campaign wins in Washington State and why it's so important for us even here in Oregon? Oh, you're muted.
I'm buying that t-shirt. You're muted. I keep saying it and then I haven't yet. But thank you. Well, first I'll say I'm so thankful for Bro and thankful for all of the students that were brave and stood up to speak up at all of the school board meetings. And I was really honored to be able to carry and support their voice and speak up on this. And I joined when the conversation was happening about, well, what parents can teach their children the importance of everything that should be all inclusive and comprehensive sex ed. Because we know when left on their own, students will turn to their friends and the internet, and we know it's rife with misinformation. And our educators who spent years studying to learn how to present information are experts in adolescent dialogue and have the ability to break down complex issues in ways students can understand. And all the data shows that for LGBTQ students to feel safe at school and to decrease harm to themselves, or to decrease even bullying, how important it is to have all-inclusive education. And so I really wanted to just speak to it from a healthcare provider perspective and not just as the state representative that was standing shoulder to shoulder with everyone. And we know that the National Association of School Nurses, the American Public Health Association, American Medical Association, Society of Adolescent Health and Medicine, American Association of Pediatrics are just few of the many groups who support comprehensive sex ed, health and wellness. And they agree that sexuality education should be medically accurate, evidence-based, age-appropriate, and should include the benefits of delaying sexual intercourse while also providing information about reproductive development. And I just, one of the stories that just always sticks with me and my professional experience as a nurse practitioner caring for vulnerable communities, including LGBTQ patients, is I cared for a gentleman who his entire life he hid who he was. He got married, he had kids, and I met him in his 80s, and I provide home-based care to those that are too fragile to get to clinics. And we got to know each other, and they felt comfortable with me, and I was able to arrive to their home and have them show me how they really identified and dress the way they identified. And it was a way to really address the depression that they were dealing with. And the first time in 80 years that they could be themselves in front of a clinician. And that is something that I don't want anyone to have to go through in their lives. And so any opportunity I can to speak up and prevent that for somebody else having to do that, I'm going to. And so it seemed like the right opportunity when this conversation was very public. And I'll stop there. I could go on and on.
All right. No, that's really helpful. I feel like so much of this conversation and so much about what's so important and why we've all fought for comprehensive sex ed is just this piece around like people being, LGBTQ people being able to hear about themselves and feel seen. And I think that's so important. And I know a lot of folks can speak to that, but Kaiden, do you want to talk a little bit about how important it is? I know you work with young people, you're a young person, about being seen and in the school environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to consider myself a voice for the younger people. I do have a master's in health promotion, so I have a little bit of expertise here in this field. I've done a lot of papers and understanding of what the benefit of comprehensive sexual health and comprehensive sex ed does for kids. Speaking about Washington State directly, we have a lot of work to still do as an inclusive state. Like I mentioned earlier, only 16% of our students have heard a positive LGBTQ plus message in sex ed, and only 25% were taught a positive message in their history classes or other inclusive curriculum opportunities, such as English class. So instead of like choosing a different book, we could opt for a more inclusive LGBT book in the history classes or in English classes. And more importantly, we need to talk about that in sexual health as well. So I feel like we also need to pause and talk about the opposite for a second here. So abstinence-only programs aren't working. It's not helping children have less STIs. We're not having better unplanned pregnancies. Nothing is improving by having that as an option, and that is why we have to continue moving forward for this present day and age. Recently, a study came out in 2020 saying 40% of high schoolers are having sex. 40% of high schoolers are having sex. Majority of those students are not using protection and are not talking about how to prepare for unplanned or unintended pregnancies. And that's a public health issue, more so than a moral issue, regardless of your religion or your political values. Like, we need to talk about 18-year-olds having STIs and pregnancies. Like, that's not an okay thing to deal with because they have a lot of room to grow. And they have a lot of things they want to accomplish. And having a child or having to deal with a STI, that's not one of the things that they should deal with. And that comes back to education and stepping aside and saying, okay, what matters more here? My student, my child, growing and thriving? Yeah, that's important. So we need to talk about that and figure out how we can do that in an inclusive way. So right now in Washington State, like 30% of our transgender youth have a lot of insecurities in the classroom, and they're missing out on hearing the message as well. And they're really impacted by the laws going in place from the bathroom bills. So now inclusive curriculum, like we can continue deep diving into how we can make our curriculum more inclusive. And I think GLSEN is trying to do our best to do research and figure out, is it talking with educators and talking with administrators? I think it's a wonderful thing to go to our state legislator and say, hey, we need more support, because guess what? The schools aren't doing it. These school districts are avoiding this conversation. So we needed someone bigger and better to step up, which is why we were so proud to have this law passed back in February and Governor Inslee's support and sign it into law in March. So now it comes to the people of Washington State to step up in November and approve R90.
Yeah, and Kaiden, that's thanks for bringing up the just the representation aspect of it that goes beyond sex ed. Like, as I mentioned before, I grew up in Boise in the 80s and 90s, and I had zero queer role models until I was out of high school, and that set me back so far. And it wasn't just sex ed; it was everywhere else. I didn't hear about any queer writers. I didn't hear about any queer historical figures. I didn't know anybody who was openly queer, and those times are changing, but we have to make sure that they're changing in the school curricula, where we have some agency over what it can be. in addition to just general better representation in media.
Yeah, for sure. It just feels like there's so many benefits outside the classroom, just for life, just for living. And I know we have a trans leadership program called Catalyst, and we ask folks in the application to name a transgender person that they've looked up to in their community, or that, you know, has had an influence in their life. And so many people were like, I don't know another transgender person, or didn't know, and like over half didn't know anybody else or didn't know anybody to put, because we don't have lives that look like that, right? Where we have folks with our same experience in our community sort of leading the way, right? And I know even with like starting my own family, I was like, there's no blueprint for this. Like, I don't know how to make this happen, you know, and it can be so complicated. And so it's so important that we sort of build that. And so in our last 13 minutes, I'd really like to talk about how people can get engaged in this campaign. And I feel like as Oregonians, it's not just solidarity, it's also like protection, right? That we need to show solid support in Washington State to prevent comprehensive sex ed from being attacked in Oregon. And so I think it's really important that we really get engaged, get involved. And Dominic, do you want to tell us about anything, any volunteer shifts or such that folks can get engaged with? So Dominic's gonna.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, yes, I can. I'm currently a disembodied voice, by the way, but I'm still here. So I have my own audience in Skype and on YouTube. It's great. Yeah, I'm going to drop a link in the chat in a second here with our volunteer shifts, but we have opened up a schedule of actions that we're going to be distributing between Referendum 90 as well as some local races. Rachel, we should talk because we probably want to work with you a little bit. I know you've got your own race to go on about, so I'll give you a segue for that as well. But when folks see that link, please click it, choose the dates. We haven't secured exactly which date is going to be going on with which candidate or which issue, but they're all going to be going to the same through us, and many of them will be on Referendum 90, exactly as we're discussing, contacting those voters, many of them who are familiar with Basic Rights Oregon just by a function of being in Southwest Washington, using that relationship to help make that connection between Basic Rights Oregon, LGBTQ justice, and Referendum 90.
Great. And Rachel, I should say you got a shout out from West Lynn saying, "Love you, Rachel."
Aw, I love you. So I basically would add how important it is to engage in your local races for this reason. Not only your school boards who really have the discussions around this, but then your state representatives who show up when LGBTQ students are being bullied, like happened in our community. When they're having these important conversations, adults need to be in the room. And I think that it's so important. So these local races, and again, Basic Rights Oregon was there for my community. I remember specifically when the other side was very organized and was showing up at every school board meeting around the area. And I texted Basic Rights Oregon and I was like, okay, we just found out they're coming to Westland Wilsonville, and you were at Lake Oswego discussing bathrooms, and we were able to immediately send people over to Westland Wilsonville. There's like this just immediate response lined up to be there for the students, to be there for the kids, to be there for the most vulnerable among us. And so I will do anything I can to be there for you and the rest of the students across the state and across the West Coast and across the country, frankly, when I have the opportunity. So getting involved entails, since we can't knock doors given a pandemic, would just be making sure that you can sign up for a phone bank shift. So my campaign is just one of many that speak up for the issues that Basic Rights Oregon holds dear to their heart. And so whichever one resonates with you or local to you, go to the website, find out how to sign up and join the the collective voice of standing up to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And we got, what, 36 days left? I kind of lost track the last few days, but I need to get back on track. It is more important than ever that we get involved now.
Great, thank you. Sarah, do you want to talk about your action items in the next 36 days?
Yeah, there's a lot to do for sure. The R90 campaign is largely about getting out the vote. Here in Washington, we found that support for the ballot measure polls fairly high. There's a third of voters are strong supporters, and that they will vote for it. A third of voters are sort of soft supporters, where they say they're in favor of sex ed, but maybe haven't committed to voting for it or don't know that it's on the ballot. And then another third are the people who are against it in some way. So, the support is there. We just need to make sure we maintain momentum and get people to the polls, literally or metaphorically. In case y'all haven't noticed, this is going to be a very, very big election, and there's going to be some very, very important things on the ballot that are going to take a lot of people's attention and time and energy. And it's going to be really tempting for a lot of folks to check just one of the boxes this November, the biggest one that they maybe care the most about. But we don't want this one to get lost in the shuffle. This is an important thing that your vote has a direct impact on. This isn't something where you can vote for something that just affects your small community, or it's not something like the presidential election where your vote just sort of gets aggregated and maybe thrown away if you don't vote with the rest of the electors or whatever. This is something where every single vote goes to that pile and can make this actually happen. We just need to make sure that people know that it exists and that it's important to check that little box.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Kaiden, you want to share your action items?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are at the moment of needing to empower and embrace the vote of the youth. I think those that are 17, about to turn 18, anytime before October 26, let's get on and let's get registered to vote. Let's get excited about it. I know a lot of people are trying to rally around that youth vote and support, and right now it's all we can do is continue to encourage for younger voters to register and to help them believe that their voice matters and their vote does matter. So many people have that conversation of oh, it doesn't make a difference, or whatever, it's just another thing to vote on. But we have to alter that belief. When we look at human behavior and health behavior theory, we have to look at their knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs. We have to give them the knowledge. We have to show them that their voice matters and that their voice does count. We have to show them the knowledge that approving referendum 90 will make a difference for this generation, not in 10 years, 20 years from now. It will directly impact these kids in school today. That will also impact their attitudes and beliefs, one, about voting, two, about the importance of this referendum and why approving R90 is so important. And then hopefully that'll just garner and encourage them to use their political voices in a positive way, especially in this current political climate.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, the R90 campaign has Facebook pages and Twitter accounts to follow and share out to all your social networks. So, just spread the word. Even if you live in Oregon, I'm sure you have friends in Washington. And so just get the word out.
Yeah. Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about, I know you are in unfriendly waters in Battleground. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're foreseeing the next 36 days?
I'm with the pandemic, we all get to stay home, so it's a level of protection. I know Battleground is a real target for being anti-LGBTQ. So, if we could connect, our community needs to connect more just in the county as well as the city or school district. We're actually more than just a city. And, what I do is I go to school board meetings all the time, and I usually talk about LGBTQ, whether it's sex ed or not. Usually not, unless it's pertinent. And so community members, that you don't have to be a parent or a student to go to school board meetings. Any community member could come. And if we had that going on just in Clark County regularly, that would make such a difference advocating for our LGBTQ youth. I've gotten a lot of work done in our district just by being the squeaky wheel pointing out problems.
Yeah, that's great. That's so important. And Austin, you want to share with us your sort of action plan?
Sure. So I really love what Sarah mentioned about how each of our individual votes counts. I have family in Burien in the Seattle area. And you know what? They are conservative folks who go to church, and I'm having conversations with them because their vote matters and their community's votes matter. And so it's really about taking some time to build relationship. If you have the spoons, if you can do it, to really talk to folks, try to listen. And a lot of these concerns that folks have are really coming from a place of fear. And so sometimes just giving folks a little bit of a listening ear and some support can help them see that there's really not anything to be afraid of, right? And letting them know what your shared values are, right? We all want our youth to be healthy. We all want our youth to be safe, and trying to build support with each other within your communities when and where you can. And also just showing some love to some LGBTQ youth who are, you know, maybe not yet getting that positive role model, right? Not yet feeling supported, and they're having to hear these sometimes really toxic messages, right? So just doing what you can to support LGBTQ youth and youth in general in your community.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll say to Basic Rights Oregon supporters, we'll have phone bank shifts, we'll have text bank shifts. You don't have to come to the office. You can do them from home. We've got some amazing technology that Dominic is helping make happen. And yeah, there's going to be lots of opportunities for you to, really fight for LGBTQ youth, which this is all about, right? And that we need comprehensive sex ed in Oregon. We need it in Washington. And folks, for those of you in Oregon, we're going to be calling just our neighbors right over the river in Vancouver, in Battleground, and, trying to have those conversations that help change hearts and minds, and that, this can be as simple as like, no, I don't want a hug, right? That's, that's where consent education starts, and that everything about this is appropriate, and it's about our kids being seen and heard. And yeah, so thank you all so much for being on today and for sharing your experience. And yeah, I feel like we're right at 1 o'clock, but thank you. And for folks watching, lots of ways to be engaged. Stay tuned. And next week is our statewide action summit, where there will be, from October 4th through 9th, there will be amazing speakers, amazing workshops. You can sign up on our website, basicrights.org. Everything is free, everything's available, and yeah, I think our content this year is maybe the best year ever. Just feeling quite excited about it. So thank you all, and then see you next time. Take care.